This video will be a set of reflections and things for you to think about regarding the first three readings that you've done. One was Stephen Covey's piece on the importance of empathy in communication. The other one was Voicing Identities Between Worlds, the experience of a series of students studying outside of their primary culture. And the one that you've just finished is Plato's Cave. So I'd like to talk a little bit about each of these. The discussions, the talking that I'll do is important to your understanding. Obviously, we're not in class together, so these are things I would have talked about or discussed with the class if we had been in class together. Things that I want you to be thinking about and understanding as you move forward in the course into additional readings and as you have assignments in the future, both writing and video and problem-solving assignments. These are ideas that will be important to your ability to do those assignments. So let's start with the motorcycle. The idea of empathy is not complicated. It's a fairly simple idea. However, most of us do not have the skills to do it. Steve Covey talks in that article that you read about things to do and things not to do. If you want to have an interesting experience sometime, try to listen to someone empathetically without doing any advising, any probing, any evaluating, any judging, and no psychoanalysis. Just reach back and turn yourself off, turn your mind off, and let the other person guide you into their worldview, into how they feel. And I think you'll discover an experience that we haven't had very often. We aren't very good at it, actually. I was in a class with Steve Covey as a graduate student in Provo, and when he was teaching us this idea, he said, "This is one of the simplest ideas, but one of the most difficult things to do in our lives, in actual communication." What I have noticed that's so interesting about empathy is that the times when I most need to do it, when I most need to be empathetic as part of communication and relationships that I have, I'm least inclined to do it. That was certainly true in the case of the motorcycle. I knew I needed to be empathetic, but the truth was my wife's view of motorcycles was very threatening to me, and I didn't want anything of it. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want it to disturb my view of motorcycles. And so even though I knew I should be this way, I did not want to put at risk having and owning a motorcycle. It seemed unimaginable to me at the time that marriage could mean, or should mean, or would ever result in me not having a motorcycle. But she was the person I was married to. She felt very strongly about it, and I knew I should be empathetic, but I knew in my heart I did not want to listen to her. I wanted to persuade her. I wanted to argue with her. I actually contacted the Department of Safety for the United States government in charge of motorcycle safety. And I did research as if though I were going to go into a debate, because I knew she would disagree. And I was ready with my argument, my reasons, my evidence, treating it a little bit like a debate. And I thought I could win the debate, and I would win her over with the pure force of my logic. But that doesn't work so well when you're dealing with a problem of this type, where it's really empathy rather than argument and persuasion that one needs to engage in. So one thing is that it's a simple idea that very few of us master, and that includes myself. I find myself still trying to do better in this regard. Second idea, when we most need to do it, we are often least inclined to do it. And so that's part of what makes it so challenging and so difficult. The third idea is, and I'll just tell you in this story, in this case, my wife and I sat in that parking lot at the nursery, and I tried very hard not to become defensive. She did also. We tried to hear each other, but we were just having to work through our emotions and feelings. And after a couple of hours of talking in that hot desert sun in St. George, we decided that we would just have to keep working on this. The third point that I want to make about empathy is it takes time. A lot of time. Sometimes it just is a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of energy to understand another person. And that was true in this case. We worked on this for 9 months, and we put on hold any final decision. We lived in California for 9 months before we were able to get to a place that would be acceptable to both of us. It was a lot of talking, a lot of trying to understand, a lot of trying to deal with our own feelings. I think you can see what's happening here is really a fourth idea. What the motorcycle really wasn't necessarily what was at issue. We were newly married, pretty newly married. What was really going on was we were trying to figure out what it meant to be married and how we were going to be with each other and how we were going to encounter each other's difference and live with it in a productive way. It didn't come natural. When you get married, you're in very close proximity to your spouse, later to your children. And people are different from each other. And yet you are striving to become one unit, to appreciate each other, but not just to appreciate each other, to integrate with each other into one, two people becoming one. That's what our Heavenly Father has counseled us to do. It's really hard work. Now, obviously, it's hard work with people that we love, and I love my wife very, very much. But it was really hard work. This business of encountering difference and accepting it and adapting to it and integrating it requires a set of skills that are very, I don't know if they're unnatural. They seem pretty unnatural to most of us. I guess I would say they're unnatural to me, something I've had to work really hard at and still am working very hard at it. But it is what is called for at this historical time. We are constantly, in the context of globalization and multicultural, intercultural living, encountering difference. And just as my wife and I, in a very close relationship, a very loving relationship, need to become more skilled at integrating our lives together and dealing with our differences. This is such an important part of the international church, being of one people in the midst of all of our cultural differences. We have far to go as a church, as a people, as individuals. Empathy provides part of the key, which is, of course, why we've started this course with this particular idea. So, the third thing I wanted you to remember is that it takes a commitment of time to really be empathetic with another person. And sometimes we're in a hurry. We want to get things done, and we want to get them done right now. We want solutions right now. This preoccupation with right now can do a great deal to damage the communication process necessary for real coordination and integration of people who are dealing with each other's differences. The fourth thing was that often what we're really working with, motorcycles in this case, is not what it's really about. And as I've said, what it was really about here was, what did it mean to be married, and how were we going to respond to each other's differences? That is, I think, why it was so important that we take the time to find our way through this, rather than one or the other of us imposing on the other our worldview or our preferences. A fifth thing is the acknowledgement in this case that nobody is right or wrong. This was what was really hard for me, because I just knew it was not wrong for me to own a motorcycle. That just couldn't be. There wasn't any way for me to arrive at that kind of a conclusion, though it was the conclusion my wife had arrived at. For her, a motorcycle meant early widowhood. If I bought a motorcycle, it was in a way a betrayal of my love for her, because if I loved her, surely I would not do something that would result in my own death and her life as a widow, which was not the way she wanted to live life. She wanted to live life with me. For me, a motorcycle meant freedom and power and enjoyment. I just love that feeling of 500 cc's, sitting on top of it and cruising through the mountains, the area of the Bay Area, San Francisco area, where we lived at the time, or where I had a motorcycle previously, right after my mission. So for both of us, we have to work towards the point at which nobody's right, nobody's wrong in this particular case. There's not a right or wrong answer. That took me a long time to get to allow her worldview to be as reasonable and rational and right as my worldview required me to take a step of a kind of relativism towards motorcycles. Owning one is neither right or wrong, and the same for her. It took that same effort on her part. So, even though for me her arguments seemed irrational and primarily emotive, just very emotional, they weren't. And as I listened, the longer I listened to her, the more I realized it is reasonable within her frame. Well, the final thing that I want you to think about is empathy is transformative. This is not a simple exercise in listening to other people. It is an exercising at putting ourselves at risk to the views of others, being transformed by them. And that is, in fact, what happened in my case. I listened to her. I felt her pain. I felt her concern. And in the end, I lost my desire to own a motorcycle, because after I felt her world and felt her pain, I could see what it would cause her, and I didn't want to own one any longer. Now I'm going to stop there. I've got a couple of other things I want to say, so I'll come back to those in the next video here in a second.